Charter Local Edition with your host, John MacDonald.
Welcome. We are visiting today with Representative Tom Woods from House District 62. Welcome, Representative.
Thank you very much.
Tell us a little bit about your district and a little bit maybe about the folks that you represent.
House District 62 is on the southeast side of Bozeman, so it just butts up against the university and extends down south towards the mountains there.
Okay, an eclectic group of folks, or?
An eclectic group of folks. A lot of university employees, a lot of folks work at the hospital, students, lots of students.
Yeah.
Sure.
Let's talk a little bit about some of the issues that you were involved in during the 2015 legislature. I know energy policy and energy regulation was one of your areas that you took some concern. And you had a couple of bills in particular that had to do with utility rate issues.
Sure.
Explain those to folks.
Well, I guess first and foremost was House Bill 189, and this has to do with how utilities recover costs when their generating facilities go down. Mm-hmm. Northwestern Energy, when it was created, only owned lines and poles. That's what they did. They distributed electricity.
Right.
And so decades ago, they put in place legislation that when the generating capacity went down, they would not be responsible for their costs. They could directly pass that on to consumers. It made sense at the time. Well, since that time, Northwestern Energy has purchased quite a bit of generating capacity. They own lots of dams now, they have coal-fired generating plants, but that legislation hasn't changed. And so now when their generating capacity goes down, they are still allowed to recoup the full cost as well as the cost of the replacement energy without consulting the PSC. So they are the only company that is allowed to do that. And I look at that as being unfair.
And so your legislation would have changed that and would have required PSC approval?
Well, what we asked for with this bill is to have one company, Northwestern Energy, treated just like every other utility company in the state. That's very simply what we were trying to do. And basically got beat like a drum.
And you had another bill that was also related to this. It was House Bill 190.
House Bill 190.
Talk a little bit about that one as well.
You know, it's very similar in that some years ago, legislation was put in place that allows utility companies to pass their tax bill or increases in property taxes directly to ratepayers, rather than putting that through the Public Service Commission. You know, the Public Service Commission's job, the PSC's job, is to make sure that utility companies get a fair rate of return. But legislation like this allows the utility companies then to work around that, to just put those costs directly onto consumers without going through the rate review. Now, Northwestern Energy, again, was the only company that uses this legislation to do this. I think it's unfair. Lots of folks on the PSC think it's unfair as well. We tried to get this passed and again got beat like a drum.
And I think at least on one of those bills you had there was some bipartisan sponsorship. Your co-sponsor was Representative Pinocci, is that correct?
That's correct. And you know, Representative Pinocci and I are opposite ends of the spectrum, political spectrum. This issue of fairness goes beyond partisanship. It goes beyond parties. This is about fairness to ratepayers, fairness to Montanans. And folks on the other side of the aisle, I think, are with me on this, as well as other Democrats. There are a number of us who are recognizing that, hey, it's not okay for one company to be able to influence legislation on its behalf.
Another issue that kind of took center stage, which prior to the 2015 legislation, a lot of people probably hadn't even heard the terminology before, net metering.
Net metering.
Talk a little bit about what that is and what the legislature was trying to accomplish.
Well, what net metering is let's say I put generating capacity on my property. I put solar panels up, I put a wind generator up, or I have a little hydroelectric facility on my property. What net metering allows me to do is sell the surplus energy that I have back to the grid. That's the idea. And it's really direction that our nation has to move in, as I see it. Now, it's complicated in that you have to have proper engineering to get it done. You have to have a fair price. paid for it. It's complicated, but the fact of the matter is, it's the direction that we should take as a nation. And once again, the utility companies, and I'll put this on Northwestern Energy, fought it tooth and nail, and they won.
And there were quite a few different proposals during the legislature. If I recall, probably at one point at least a half a dozen different bills that tried to approach this, sometimes from different angles.
Sure.
Talk about what some of those were.
Well, from my standpoint, I look at net metering as the direction that we need to take as a state. We can't survive doing the same thing that we have always done in terms of power generation and distribution. I see this as evolution. Folks on the other side of the aisle see this as market fairness, that they see that, gosh, what we have right now is a corporate monopoly on power generation and distribution, and it's not a free market, it's not a fair market, and so they're approaching it from that angle, and quite frankly, they have a very good point.
Let's switch subjects a little bit here and just kind of talk about the session overall for 2015. Highs and lows for you, obviously. I think some of the energy regulation was probably a low for you, but what were some of the high points, some of the things that you thought were a success?
Well, the fact that the water compact was passed, I think that is great for our state. The fact that more people in the state of Montana are going to have access to medical care through Medicaid expansion, huge win for us. Mm-hmm. And so it was a tough session, but we got some very good things done.
Was it what you thought it would be, or a little bit more difficult?
It is just, I never know what to expect going to the legislature, mm-hmm. and that's what I get every time, is something I didn't expect. I didn't expect that folks on the other side of the aisle were going to come over to this idea of net metering. I was pleased to see that a number of folks got on board with this idea of Medicaid expansion being good for the state of Montana, mm-hmm. being good for business. I'm pleased with that. I was very disappointed that the infrastructure bill lost by one vote after we went back and forth and negotiated what I thought was a very good bill.
Mm-hmm. Well, Representative, it's been great getting a chance to talk with you. We have been visiting today with Representative Tom Woods from House District 62. Representative, I appreciate it. Thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure.
Charter Local Edition has been an exclusive presentation of Charter Communications, providing original programming.